I often tell people the security guard in the parking lot can make or break your crisis response.
If you are the entity, if you're the person telling the story first, then all of the other stories matter less.
What are you afraid of? What are you afraid to answer so that we can talk it through and you're not afraid of it anymore?
That's another thing that can contribute to making a crisis worse.
Even in the worst scenario, there is always something you can say. Thanks for tuning in to Keep It Legal, the show where we break down concepts, litigation, and current events with our legal experts. I'm your host, Mark Anik. We're going to do something just a little bit different today. Normally, if you're a loyal follower of the program, and I know there are thousands of you out there, you know that we invite in an attorney, someone with whom we work, and we talk about his or her practice, perhaps some legal issues going on in their realm, or maybe a case that they just had that hopefully they were successful on. Today, we're going to do something just a little bit different. We're going to talk about crisis communications, and joining me to do that are a number of my colleagues here at Androvett in Dallas and in Houston, and I want to introduce a couple of them now so that they can join us for the discussion. So joining us from our Houston office is April Arias Cadena. April is our Senior Director of Public Relations. Hi, April.
Hi, excited to be here.
Excited to have you and not be alone on this. Also with me is Barry Pound, our Director of Public Relations in Dallas.
Hello, Mark.
Hello, Barry. And our producer, Alyssa Wolf, our digital PR manager, is also with us today, and she's actually got a microphone, so she can contribute to this discussion as well.
How exciting. And my first time in front of the mic on this program.
You are excited. I can see it in your face. So a little bit about us before we kick off this discussion. We are Androvett. We are a full-service marketing and PR agency serving companies and organizations across the country. We were founded in 1995 by Mike Androvett, former reporter and lawyer. And our focus is largely on lawyers and law firms, but through the years, we've also worked with people in retail, healthcare, financial services, education. Barry, what am I forgetting? What could we add to the list? Because there are many.
Retail.
Yeah.
Windows.
Windows. We did do somebody who did window manufacturing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we wanted to do today is bring together the four of us that we have around the microphone and just talk a little bit about crisis communications, because it's something that we all see in the news regularly. We see stories that turn into crises for companies, and we wanted to leave you, the listener, with perhaps some information and some thoughts with regard to how you may want to handle those things if they happen in your world, in your company. We're going to start out with Boeing. And a disclaimer on this: Boeing is not a company for which we work. April and Barry and I and Alyssa don't know anything more about Boeing than you do from reading the newspapers, watching TV. But we begin with what happened to Boeing most recently, and that is this Alaska Airlines jet that was flying along, presumably with no problem whatsoever, in January when a door plug blew out while the plane was at altitude. They were able to land that plane and everybody walked away from it. And that followed the 737 MAX crashes that happened in October of 2018 and 2019, and the whole MCAS investigation, that piece of software that would push down the nose that Boeing and the airlines never bothered to tell the pilots about. This latest crisis, even though I think generally speaking, and we'll get into this in a moment, even though it was better handled, has led to yet the next resignation of the next CEO. So we want to talk about that a little bit and some of the lessons that draw from it. Barry, April, as Alyssa, as viewers and readers of the story, just initial impressions of Boeing and what that looks like?
Well, I mean, obviously you can't get away from the video aspect. There was really no way for Boeing to act like it didn't happen. I mean, it was happening. We were watching it as it was happening, essentially. It was so quick. But what I really thought has been interesting on Boeing's part is its reaction and how quickly it's been, putting out statements, that sort of thing. On their website now, I'm very intrigued by how, that very same day, Boeing put out a statement, very short, didn't say much, but really started kind of communicating that they were watching and they would be investigating. And since then, they've put out regular statements, and you can kind of see the evolution of Boeing's reaction and everything that has happened. I think in that respect, they've done well.
Do you get the impression, April, I'm interested, that you see the statements on the web? Clearly, somebody was writing statements, or at least the outline of a statement, before this happened. Do you get the impression that the company learned from the 737 MAX crisis, as much as they never walked away from that all shiny and spiffy again? Do you think perhaps somebody went in and revised their communications process after that?
I mean, it seems like they have. They didn't try to blame anyone. They didn't try to, say anything more than we know this has happened and we're investigating. I think it's clear that they weren't going to try to go too far.
You mentioned video, and video was one of the things that I thought of the moment I saw that story. I was a reporter many, many years ago. I always tell people in the last century. So if I had been covering that story, there never would have been pictures on board the aircraft. Nowadays, everybody's got a phone. The camera on the phone is better than or as good as an awful lot of things you might find in a newsroom. And there was video from inside that aircraft almost immediately. In fact, we've all seen instances now where images are being tweeted while the particular problem is ongoing. What do we think of the fact that there's video for everything immediately nowadays?
Well, you just have to realize that. I think it's what a lot of us with kids tell our kids. Anything you do is going to be captured by someone's cell phone, and just be aware of that and be prepared for that from the corporate standpoint.
Does it make the whole crisis communications process and cycle much more rapid than it was 10 years ago, 5 years ago?
Absolutely. News gathering now is not limited to reporters. Everybody's got a phone, and everyone is very used to taking that phone and capturing whatever video, audio that they're encountering, immediately posting it, and the so-called news organizations are quick to get out there and find that kind of footage.
You have a plane full of reporters. I mean,
Yeah.
once you know that that's what's happening, you have to react that way.
I think historically, an entity or a company that finds themselves in a position that is less than favorable has been quick to react in the sense of kind of downplaying what happened. And video is something that allows or doesn't allow those companies to do that, because you're seeing firsthand essentially what happened. In this instance, when a door flies off the plane, maybe years and years ago, the company would have said, oh, like just a minor hiccup, but with video and everyone seeing what actually happened, that removes the ability for people to do that. They have to say, well, this is what happened because you can see it, and we have to react in real time to what others are seeing versus what others are just hearing.
So all of this is fascinating. I want to pose what hopefully is a provocative question. We see the video, we've got the door plugged. We since have seen the stories about the inspection process at Boeing and the fact that some of the people doing the inspection are in fact Boeing employees, and that they have this problem with work traveling from one station to the next. They call it literally traveled work, and that's how these bolts did not get reinstalled. Can good PR make up for that? Can good PR solve Boeing's problem today or any other day? Barry, you're shaking your head.
No, I mean, you can have the best crisis communications plan and the best people and everything go right, and still it's going to go wrong. That's just almost unavoidable anymore, I think.
You can't just wave the magic PR wand and
There is no magic PR wand. All PR can do is reflect reality. It can't make the reality.
Common misconception, though.
Oh,
There is no PR magic wand.
Make it go away.
Darn,
You know?
I was looking for my magic PR wand in my desk. The other thing that I walk away from this one with is something our colleague Mary Flood always says, also an attorney, also a former correspondent, legal correspondent for the Houston Chronicle, the Wall Street Journal. When Mary speaks to lawyers and companies, she will tell them at the top of her list of do's and don'ts, don't lie. Don't ever put out into the information stream a half-truth, a prevarication. There are times in this story, going back to the 737 MAX crashes, where the airline came out right away and they were blaming it on those pilots. And they weren't bothering to tell anybody that we had this piece of software that in fact was the cause of the crashes. Okay, so let's move on from Boeing to more general terms and talk about what constitutes a crisis. I've written down in my notes here, it can mean different things to different people. It can mean different things in different situations. April and I were talking a few moments ago because we're preparing to talk to another group for a continuing legal ed piece about crisis communications. And the example that I used was, if you're a company that bought an electronic sign on the side of the road and the sign is down, then that's not a crisis for your company. If you're a company that sells electronic signs on the side of the road and all of them are down, that's a crisis for your company because it's your brand. It's what you do. Thoughts on different things that constitute a crisis and maybe things that don't?
Active shooter, hurricane.
Yeah, and isn't it awful that active shooter ends up at the top of our list nowadays? Whereas 10, 20 years ago, I don't know if we would have said active shooter. We would have said, some sort of natural disaster, right? And now it's at the top of our list. I've written down, generally speaking, a crisis is something that poses a significant, even existential threat to a company and its business. Fair? Would you edit it, Mr. Pound?
It doesn't even necessarily have to rise to a threat to your business. I think it's just a crisis can just be scrutiny that you don't want or need. That in and of itself can just be a crisis. It's not going to affect your company's stock significantly. It's not going to make you go out of business, but it can just be something that you don't want and don't need. And again, whether that's just from the general public or from the news media, that can also be a crisis.
You bring up a good point. You and I very often receive calls from companies that are in the midst of something that may not be full-blown existential, but it's something that bothers them enough that they want to have the planning and preparation in place.
Yeah, it could just as easily be a CEO who is retiring. Well, that's not necessarily a crisis unless, you sort of make it one by not being forthcoming and by not having a plan and executing on that.
We're going to talk a little bit about plans while we sit here around the table. So
We like plans.
We like plans. We don't like things coming at us unannounced. We don't like being unprepared. All right, let's move on to our next scenario. Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales. Let me start by saying I wish the Princess of Wales nothing but the very best. I know that she's dealing with a very very serious health condition. As someone who's a parent, I can't imagine what it's like to be her age in her early 40s with young children, and she's worried about something like cancer. So we wish her the very best. The story there, though, and the reason why she's on our list is that she went to the hospital for surgery. We all know this story. And we were told it was some sort of abdominal surgery, and then we heard nothing else. And this is an example I've written down in my notes of it's not a company. The Royals are an entity all to their own. But it's an example of people, I think, hoping that if you ignore something, it will just go away. Fair?
Yeah. Trust us. Everything is fine.
With a platform as big as the Royals have, no comment is no good. And we always say that around here, that no comment is no good, but especially with an audience and a following like the Royals have, them not speaking about it ended up in the internet going rampant and wild with conspiracy theories, and they turned the situation into a bigger crisis than it really needed to be, in my opinion.
Yeah, it was not just, the vacuum that the Royals created. It is also sort of the ham-handed, the photoshopped photos and inconsistent messaging. That's also a big contributor to the problem. And the problem being you're not telling us the truth and you're not telling us what you know in a timely manner. And I get it. Whether you're a princess or a public company, you don't want to talk about the personal health of those who are in charge. But this is kind of a situation where health is not sacrosanct. I mean, you've got to talk about those kinds of things because of how they affect other people. You can't just keep it to yourself.
That this was a situation where you're using an old playbook. Why would you think that, especially in this age where everything is digital, everybody's very computer savvy, that they're not going to realize that this particular photo was photoshopped? I really think that they really need to, move ahead in in times and realize that you're not the Royals that you used to be. This is 2024.
And you can no longer say it as a royal decree and it's accepted. You mentioned the Photoshop photo. We had that calamity. Then we had all the rumors that her husband must be engaging in an affair somewhere. It just really spun out of control. I was left with the impression that either they had very bad PR people, they weren't listening to their PR people, or they were deciding to do, the Royals, they were deciding to do PR on their own. And I'm not sure what one of those it was, but the outcome was not good. And it only ended when they finally did what I think the four of us would have advised from the get-go, notwithstanding her health, assuming she could have done this, sit her down somewhere and have her make a statement to the public. And right away, all the rumors didn't go away, but it really tamped them down. It made it very, very difficult to come out after that video and say, aha. Instead, everybody came out after that video and expressed sympathy, which is what you want. Alyssa, you said something that they turned it into a bigger crisis by virtue of their response. And I think that goes back to something we were talking about in the Boeing story, where I asked you, can PR cure bad acts by the company? And the answer is no. But PR can certainly take a negative situation and make it demonstrably worse. And I think that's what happened here.
Yeah, what strikes me about this is if you're in the position of the royal family or, again, a company, leadership tends to default of we can't say anything because it's not finalized, it's not settled, we don't have all the answers, consequently we can't say anything. And I think that's faulty thinking. You make matters worse when you delay saying something. And again, it doesn't even have to be a lot, but as long as you're saying something, that can buy you time, it can buy you goodwill, it can buy you credibility that you need to sort of ride it out until you do have all of the answers. People expect an immediate response. They don't expect an immediate resolution.
It also, it occurs to me that by responding before you have all the facts, and we work with lawyers day in and day out, and they get very nervous at that. But what Barry is saying is, well, okay, can you respond within the parameters of the facts that you know now, right? And I think the other thing that does for you is it tells the reporters, hey, we're going to be talking on this story. We're not going to put our hand in the camera. And it says to the reporters, you can come back to us as the story develops. And depending on the situation, I might argue that's a very, very good thing to do, because reporters are going to cover your story. They're going to cover Kate Middleton. She's the Princess of Wales. You're not going to get around that. Do you want them getting information from you where you might have some sort of input on that story process, or do you want them getting it somewhere else?
Well, and again, it helps you control what it is that the public opinion is about whatever the crisis may be. In this situation, because they didn't respond and because they were not transparent from the beginning, it led to all these theories about what could have happened. If they had said something, like you're suggesting, Barry, kind of at the beginning of the debacle, they would have built trust among their audience. And it's like you said, we could have avoided a lot of the rumors that ended up kind of happening afterwards.
Well, and then you heard it initially, and then you start to squander away that credibility, and it hurts you for future, issues that there might be, because they're always now going to question, is that photo real? Everybody's going to be looking at that. Every time the Royals put out a photo, they're going to be looking at it.
And that whole notion of photos being real, boy, that's something all of us are going to be dealing with as long as we work in this business, right? Because with AI, anything is possible. I want to move on to something, Barry, you said before, and that's the word plan. When somebody comes to us, and in the best possible scenario, somebody will come to us in advance, right? So if we were working for the palace, in the best possible scenario, someone would have come to us and said, I need you to know the princess is going into the hospital for surgery. I need the four of you to come up with something that we can say. Tell us, give us some thoughts and ideas, right? In the best possible scenario, our clients come to us and they let us know about something that's perhaps lurking on the horizon so that we can sit down and put together a plan. Let's talk about the things that go into that. If I call you tomorrow, April, and I've got a scenario like the palace, or I have a scenario like Boeing, where I know that some negative information is going to come out, what are some of the first things that you want to do and know so that you can start putting together a plan?
I think one of the first things is who are we going to be talking to? Who are our audiences? Who is going to need to who are we going to be sending a statement to? Who internal, external? There's so many things to consider.
Talk to me about that, because you and I are used to the notion of audiences. But if we say this to a communications newcomer or someone who hasn't been through a crisis before, they think audience and they think somebody going to a movie. Or you have distinct audiences. What are some of the audiences that companies may care about?
Well, your customers, your clients, your vendors, help me. Who else? Who am I missing?
Employees? Your
Yeah.
employees?
Obviously internal. Yeah. Shareholders. Do you need to be talking to, the board, things like that.
Right. And we very often, Barry, will put together different pieces of communication for those different kinds of audiences.
Sure, different audiences have different priorities, different concerns, different language in many cases, or different ways that they expect to be communicated with. So you have to consider all of those. And just circling back to an audience, and it's a bit of it's not a pet peeve, but when you and I have been in this kind of situation before where we're trying to define the audience with the help of a client, say, the internal audience, employees, is the most frequently overlooked. They'll go through 4 or 5, other things that they're really concerned about, and we raise our hand and say, "What about your employees?" And it's like a light bulb goes off in many cases. So, I would advocate in many, many cases they're the most important audience because they know more about you, they know more about what's going on. They're actually closer to it. In many ways, it's more important to them, getting out of this crisis than any other audience that you have.
Totally. And I would argue, too, that that's another thing that can contribute to making a crisis worse is if you don't inform any internal audience that they feel should know before any external audience does.
Do companies, I'm asking you to make a generalization, but it's a podcast, so we're allowed. Do companies understand that employees should often be some of their best advocates? That if you communicate with those employees, because they're going to be out at the grocery store, they're going to run into somebody. Hey, what's going on at your company? They're going to be at church. Somebody's going to say, hey, I saw that thing in the paper. What's going on over there? Do companies get that?
I think the first thing that somebody may say when they get a question like that at the grocery store or at church about a crisis, if they weren't told about it, would say, I found out the same time you did. And that does not bode well for said company.
You bring up a very good point. Very often we'll define the audiences, April, as you did, right, in the different groups, and we'll decide, hey, if this story is going to break on Friday, and we know that it's going to break on Friday, and we have the ability to go to some of those important audiences on Wednesday or Thursday, there's an awful lot to be gained by that. What do you gain when you go to those folks in advance and you let them know what the news is before the news shows up?
Well, you gain credibility, I think. I think that's the big thing. And if you are the entity, if you're the person telling the story first, then all of the other stories matter less. You've framed it. I'm telling you about this, and if you can say that, you may be seeing more about this, but here's the real story. Hopefully you have built up the sort of relationships with, again, your employees, your customers, whatever, that they believe you, and you're telling them, you're getting it to them first. Whatever else I hear or read, I'm sticking with who I know because they trusted me and they told me first.
You're writing the first draft of the history, right? And then the news coverage comes along behind that, and people are going to filter that news coverage through whatever you told them.
Yeah.
What about preparing for media to show up? We often will tell people, hey, you need to let folks at your business to know that reporters may show up. Are there people in that process that too often are neglected? Are there important people in that process? April, you're nodding your head back and forth.
Well, I think it's the people that are easily forgotten and easily overlooked. It's the people who are answering the phones. Is it the people who are at the front desk? Those are the people that I think you should get to first because they're going to get the reporter questions right away.
I often tell people the security guard in the parking lot can make or break your crisis response. When I was a reporter, if the security guard chased me away, the story just became, as much as I wanted to be fair, the story just became a little bit more difficult for that company. Whereas if somebody approached me when I walked up and said, understand you've got to cover something, hang here, let me find somebody who can talk to you, I have a completely different perspective of the company. And there were companies that did both. There were companies that absolutely did both. All right, let's move on to our next scenario. Crises happen not just to companies, but they also happen to states and municipalities. We're recording this, Barry and I and Alyssa are sitting in our Dallas office. Dallas had a crisis where it had a number of hacking instances, both at the city and the county level. The big crisis that showed up most recently was the collapse of the Key Bridge in Maryland, right? And the port that was shut down. Barry, you noticed something about the governor there who was called out to the scene, and we always look at the governor. He may know not a single thing about shipping or, big container ships, but reporters are always going to pop a mic under his nose and want to know what's going on. What did you observe that the governor was doing that was a good thing that day?
Well, number one, he was there. He was visible. He expressed sympathy. He was empathetic to those who had lost their lives, those whose lives had been affected, who had no role, in what had happened. But it was again a very real and forthright approach to talking to folks about this. And he didn't. His answers, if you want to call them that, were minimal because, again, at the time, it's a fluid situation. You don't know everything. But still, he was willing to stand there and, again, sort of frame the issues, provide some reassurance that the right things are going to happen here and, sort of build folks up that, hey, we're in this together and we're going to solve this together.
I remember you walking into work the morning that happened and saying the governor was really good because a question came up and he was not afraid to say, I don't know.
I don't know is a great answer.
You can't use it all the time, but it's okay to say every once in a while.
Yeah, absolutely.
When it's the truth.
Right. And it's even better when you say, I don't know, but let me check on that and see if I can develop some information and get it back to you. Reporters, I often tell people, will make you feel as if you must have an answer for every single question. When I was a reporter, I tried to make the interviewee feel that way, right? Because I wanted an answer to every single question because it made my story better. But the thing that I tell people now is, if you have an answer, go ahead and provide it. But there's nothing that says that you must have an answer for everything. And nobody is a walking Encyclopedia Britannica. So there may be some fact or some piece of the story that you're not aware of and you need to come back to them on.
The other thing that can help in that situation, when you get the question and you don't know the answer, that identifies what people are interested in. That identifies what you do need to answer, what you do need to research, what you do need to find out more about. So, that can work to your advantage to be able to get out there quickly and even say, I don't know, because then you can identify what you need to focus on a little bit.
I want to go back to the planning process because, again, this is something we do on a regular basis, almost daily basis. Barry, April, if somebody were to come to us tomorrow and drop a scenario on our desks, we would sit down and start to develop themes so that the corporation could talk about those issues if they had to. We would develop a Q&A document. We'd try to figure out if we were reporters again, what would we ask? What would the questions be? What are the answers? Talk to me a little bit about that. Why is that so important? And do companies do enough of that in advance?
Well, to your last question, I don't know that. Well, let me say this. I think some companies do. Some companies obviously don't. A generalization, but I think that you can always develop a plan around what you know. Go ahead and do it. I mean, back to the Boeing situation. If you're Boeing, and you're asked to identify a crisis for your company, well, that would be a crash. That's obvious. Okay, well then start preparing for that. Then what's the next most likely crisis? I mean, work your way down the list. At the same time, in the back of your mind, knowing this isn't everything. And if you put the bricks in that wall, it'll be easier to add a new one.
It goes back to our notion that I always tell people that the first time they hear a question or they hear a series of questions should not be when a reporter walks up to them with a microphone or a pad and a pen, right? They ought to have heard the questions previously. Somebody should have sat them down and put them through the drill, not because we're trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes, but because you've got 10 seconds maybe to articulate your view of the situation. If you haven't mapped that out, if you haven't practiced it, it becomes very difficult to do it and do it well in the moment.
And it's not rehearsing an answer, it's knowing generally what you need to say in a specific situation. You don't have to worry about a script or an exact statement, but knowing where you're supposed to go is you're light years ahead of where you could be if you hadn't practiced.
Yeah, and practice can take all sorts of forms. I mean, we've done this where we've sat in a room with somebody and we set up a camera and we put a microphone on their blouse or their tie and we ran them through the drill and asked them questions. Alyssa, you and I have done it of late on Zoom with a lawyer's client, talking to her about, hey, these are the kinds of things reporters are going to ask you, and then having her give us the answers so that they can run through the drill and everybody can hear, oh, that's the answer for that? Do I like that? Is that true? Did we leave something out? Can we say it better so that it shows up better in the story? All of those are things that you can do in order to prepare before you end up in the thick of something that may be pretty bad.
And asking sometimes the question, what are you afraid of? What are you afraid to answer so that we can talk it through and you're not afraid of it anymore?
As lawyers would say, what's the bad fact?
Exactly.
Right? And so often people don't want to talk about that. And when we walk into the room, the four of us, we always want to know what it is because somebody's trying to push it into the corner or under the rug. And we want to put it in the center of the table and say, okay, what are we going to do with that? And here's something that I would like people to remember. Even in the worst scenario, there is always something you can say. There is always something you can say. It may not be the best day, but there's something that you can say, and there's a way to say it to keep the situation from getting any worse than it already is.
Can I ask a question to play devil's advocate here?
You absolutely can.
Someone listening may say, well, what if an unprecedented crisis hits us and it's breaking news and we feel that we don't have time to gather a whole plan and train in this way? What would our response be to that?
I know what mine would be. Mine would be, tell me as much as you can tell me right now. I want as much information as you have right now so that at least we're dealing with facts, or the facts as we know them currently. And then what I tell people, and it's the last line in my outline here, is there's always time to prepare. If we're a week out and we can sit down in a room, there's time to prepare. In your scenario, if we're 15 minutes away from the media showing up on our company's property, let's use those 15 minutes to just figure out, what are they going to ask us? What do we know? What are we comfortable talking about? And can we clear that through the people who matter? Part of any plan is always going to be, okay, who's on that crisis communications team, right? Who's there from the C-suite? Is that a CEO? Is that a COO? Who's there from the legal team? Who's there from the communications team? But can we look at that even in 15 minutes? We ought to be able, hopefully we're smart people, we ought to be able to figure out something. Is that practical?
Oh, absolutely. Again, you don't. If you're in a situation like you described, there's still 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 things that you can say. That'll buy you a great deal of time if you have those and you have them. If you have them ready, use them. And we're smart people. We work with smart people. Yeah, you can do that in 15 minutes. You can do that in 20 minutes.
So for the record, though, the things that we can say in those moments do not include the words no comment. And they do not include we don't comment on matters in litigation. Each of those is an excuse. Each of those too often gets translated into we're bad, we're guilty, we did something wrong. There's always something better than those that you can offer somebody. I want to end with a little bit of humor. And I don't know if you saw this. And for people who are listening, we're going to include a visual of this in our show notes on the webpage, androvett.com/podcasts. Did I get that right? Yeah. ANDROVETT.com/podcast. And the humorous one goes back to February of 2018 when Kentucky Fried Chicken, KFC, in Great Britain ran out of chicken. And it became a huge problem there. And they actually had to close hundreds of locations in the UK because they did not have any chicken. Okay, so you're going to have to imagine this. You've got the letters KFC on the Kentucky Fried Chicken bucket. And what they did in order to apologize for not having chicken and having had to close all these restaurants is they created an ad. They took those letters KFC and they rearranged them such that they said FCK and emblazoned the bucket with it. And the ad included text saying, "We're sorry." And the reaction in Great Britain was very, very positive. They took a negative, this awful thing that, you're a chicken restaurant, you have no chicken. I think they even said that in their ad, and people laughed. And in the moment that laughter happens, their crisis is over. How genius is that?
It's genius. And I think that you can use humor in your response depending on what type of organization you are and what your audience is.
And what your crisis was.
Read the room.
Yeah, read the room. Read the room. If this were not just a matter of being out of chicken, if something had happened at a KFC and somebody was horribly injured or worse, could you do humor, Barry?
No.
You can do humor because we ran out of chicken.
We ran out of chicken.
It's a coffee shop running out of coffee.
And your reaction was the same thing as our reaction. So, we're all in this together, and the use of humor, I think is brilliant. Again, can't do it in every situation, but sometimes it works.
What about the use of the expletive, or in this case, the implied expletive? Not all companies are going to want to do that, April.
No, but if it works for your audience, you know. It's not going to be a hospital or something like that. KFC clearly can get away with it in this instance.
Right. Boeing can't get away with it. No, not going to work. Not something we want to hear from somebody who...
No, we're here to blow the doors off. No, doesn't work.
It's just awful that you would say that, but it's also incredibly funny.
Read the room, Barry. Read the room.
Right.
There you go. Let's write that down in our crisis handbook. Any last thoughts, ladies and gents, before we go?
I'm so glad we've had this time together.
Have you, Carol?
Yeah.
I appreciate that. All right. April, Barry, Alyssa, thanks for joining us for our discussion of crisis communications. I appreciate it. And thank you for joining us and listening to Keep It Legal. You can visit us at androvett.com, ANDROVETT.com, for more information about our work and how we help out different companies with crisis work. Make sure to like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and tune in next time to Keep It Legal. I'm your host, Mark Anik. We'll see you then.